Good afternoon. I'm Acting President of Santa Clara University, Lisa Kloppenberg, and it is with great pleasure that I join you today for Santa Clara Real Estate Institute's 5th Annual Symposium. It's so fun to be back face-to-face for our signature event, and it's such a pleasure because I've had a personal connection to the Institute since it started. I was there when building a program like this was just an idea that we spoke about with a few supporters over breakfast. And now the Institute has launched into an incredible program that has supported hundreds of our students, sending them out into the real estate industry. Some of you from the early days are here with us today, and I know you join me in being proud of where the Institute is now and its potential for the future. And of course, all this work is done hand in hand with our Student Real Estate Association. In particular, I'm very pleased and proud to announce some great news from NAIOP University's Challenge. I don't know if you've heard yet, but please join me in offering a hearty congratulations to the Santa Clara University Real Estate Association team members who won the first annual NAIOP Silicon Valley Case Study Competition University Challenge. These students should be here with us tonight, so will you please stand as I call your name? Kenny Berg, AJ DiCristoforo, Eris Douglas, Natalie Flynn, and Michael Perry. Their names are etched into a brass plate affixed onto the silver sledgehammer. I hope all of you saw it when you came in. As the sledgehammer makes its way around to competing schools in future years, Santa Clara will always be known as the first winner. So thank you, students. I also want to thank the whole Real Estate Advisory Board, but in particular, Matt DiNapoli, Stan Jones, Jim Whelan, and Jeff Cushman for their work on an outstanding symposium program this year. And it's great to see John A. Sobrato, one of our inspirations and supporters, here as well. Such a wealth of knowledge, ideas, and insight in this audience. I will encourage you we strongly encourage masks indoors. We've had an outbreak in the last 3 weeks, and our poor students have 2 more weeks to get through classes and finals. So we're trying to keep them healthy. So I encourage you to wear your masks as you socialize with each other. Now, to get things started, please join me in welcoming Hassam Naji, President and CEO of Marcus & Millichap. Marcus & Millichap is the largest firm in North America specializing in real estate investment, brokerage, financing, research, and advisory services. Founded in 1971, the company has grown to nearly 2,000 brokerage and financing professionals in 80 offices across the U.S. and Canada, and was once again the leading broker by transaction count in 2021. Last year, Marcus & Millichap completed a record 13,255 transactions and $84.4 billion in volume, covering every property type. Well known for its dominance in the private investor segment, the company started Institutional Property Advisors 10 years ago as a specialized division to cater services to institutional clients. Mr. Naji joined Marcus & Millichap in 1996 as Vice President of Research and Advisory Services and was named CEO in 2016. During those years, he assumed a variety of responsibilities, including Chief Marketing Officer, launching the company's IPA division, overseeing all specialty division sales, and leading its IPO in 2013 as Chief Strategy Officer. Prior to that, he was Senior Vice President of Research and Technology for Grubb & Ellis, where he started his career in 1986. He is frequently quoted as an industry trend spokesperson in major media, including CNBC, Fox Business, Bloomberg, Yahoo Finance, the Wall Street Journal, and various real estate publications. And while Mr. Nagy earned his Bachelor of Science in Information Management and Computer Science from City University in Seattle, we welcome him back to Santa Clara University as an old friend and honorary Bronco. Thank you so much.
Joining me right now here in Los Angeles, Hassam Nagy, President and CEO of Marcus & Millichap. So in this commercial real estate story, where is the growth?
As an investment, apartments have been a preferred choice. We are seeing incredible demand for student housing. We're also seeing a lot of strength in manufactured home communities.
Industrial is one of the favorite sectors now, if not the favorite sector.
The affordable housing segment of the rental market, where you have a lot of HUD financing and tax credits that are available to developers, they're seeing tremendous demand as well. We're creating plenty of jobs to create demand for industrial warehouses, self-storage units, apartments, of course, and even shopping centers.
What's the runway like at this point?
But we can't forget the fact that the change in the real estate industry over the last 10 years is probably the turnaround story of the last half century.
How do you see the real estate market?
The story is about yield globally. Everywhere that we have certainly attended investor meetings, from Shanghai to Munich to Toronto in the last 12 months or so, it's all about yield. 5 to 7% yield profile in a very tax-friendly vehicle through commercial real estate that has not been overbuilt. It hasn't been over-leveraged.
Hassam Nagy, Marcus & Millichap, great insight into a market that everybody around here cares about. Hassam, thank you very much. Have a great day.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can all hear me okay. It sounds like it's not working fine. Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me. Thank you for that introduction. It's an absolute pleasure for me to be a part of the program in this very special institution. As you heard in 1971, George Marcus had an idea of creating a service organization for real estate investors right here in Palo Alto. Our roots, our Bay Area history, with all the involvement that George Marcus has had in this community, with Bill Millichap, the late Bill Millichap has had in this community, is really special to me. I've been honored to be part of this organization since 1996. It's so wonderful to see so many old friends, clients, and new faces, and the next generation of real estate leadership that is sitting right here, right now, who are going to take our industry to the next level for the next 10 to 20 years. I absolutely encourage everybody to get involved with real estate in one shape or another, because it touches every aspect of our lives. And in that regard, this afternoon, my job is to give you some perspective on the economy, give you some perspective on capital markets, and of course, real estate. But I think we should take a step back and think about all the change that we've all been through over the last 2 years. There are certain aspects of life that will never look the same ever again. Think about it. Whoever paid any attention to these objects on the slide until we absolutely had to? And in some ways, it really took us all back to the very basics of life and necessity and healthcare and so on. It's been a tragic period for so many who suffered from the pandemic, both physically, of course, and economically. But here we are in a really unusual time for the U.S. economy and for commercial real estate. So let's take a look at some of those things that matter the most. To me, there's so many negative headlines we skim every day. We're bombarded with them. So one of the things that I did recently was to say, if somebody had been abducted by aliens 10 years ago and returned back to Earth today, and you were trying to get up to speed on what's happened since you were gone, since you were abducted, here's what you would find as a 10-year snapshot. You would find that our population has increased by nearly 20 million people. Our young adult population has increased by over 3 million people. Household growth has exceeded 10 million. We have 10 million more households. We have 18 million more jobs today than we did 10 years ago. Unemployment rate is down by almost 500 basis points. There are 7.8 million job openings today. for a third of which there are no qualified workers, and companies are having a hard time finding qualified workers. For the graduating class, you're coming in at the right time. And take it easy on those wage requirements for employers who really need your talent. Think about that. We have more job openings than there are qualified workers. There is a 43% increase in core retail sales adjusted for inflation. So the consumption power of the U.S. is alive and well. Our GDP, total economic output, has grown by $8.5 trillion in the last 10 years. That's putting Great Britain and Japan's total economic output together. That's how much we've grown by. So amid all the negativity and all the fear points that you're exposed to every single day, let's not lose track of how far we've come in the last 10 years. A lot of bumps in the last 10 years, of course. And 2011 was just the beginning of the recovery after the Great Recession. But let me share what I think is far more important and far more exciting than all of these points. Today, this very day, 10,000 baby boomers turn 65. In fact, you turn 65 or older today, raise your hand. Somebody, there is one. Somebody, I won't say the name, just celebrated 83 not too long ago. 10,000 people a day are turning 65 in our country. So the aging of the baby boomers is a profound and really, really important demographic factor. The baby boomers are the wealthiest generation of all time. The wealth transfer that is playing out over the next 3 decades will be profound in the way that capital is going to require a return, and commercial real estate will do well. But at the same time, we're the only developed country on the planet where 12,000 people today will turn 21 at the same time. That dual demographic firepower of the U.S. is the envy of the world. We have the demographic advantage. You can argue about immigration policy, you can argue about the education system, and all the things that are broken with our system. But at the end of the day, we have the most favored system and the most favored demographics. So that is a framework of positivity and a lot of assets to work with. Let's take a look at some of the things. So it's painful to see the Fed having to catch up on interest rates. They're going to have to be aggressive, they're going to have to be dramatic, and this is the kind of the result of the interest rate reduction that happened during the pandemic, and the time that it stayed near zero or at zero, and now the catch-up forecast for the rest of this year of the number of times and the magnitude that the Fed has to raise interest rates. Very scary. The stock market is reacting pretty violently, as you can expect. Job growth is likely to slow. GDP is likely to slow. Really scary. This is a significant adjustment and big headwind, of course. But if you zoom out and go back to the 1950s and look at a multi-decade view of interest rates, had I not shown you the dramatic increase from 0 to 300 basis points that the Fed just has to manage somehow, had I just shown you this long-term picture on interest rates, you wouldn't have seen a problem. The previous chart is the tail on the right of the increases, which are still well below the long-term average. So overall, interest rates are not at a scary place. In fact, for any of the seasoned clients that we have in the audience today that I was saying hello to earlier, if you think about a 4% yield on the Treasury or 3% yield on the Treasury, these are not high interest rates. We've seen teens and high single-digit interest rates many, many times before. The economy can withstand it. It's the adjustment that we're going through. The other thing to keep in mind for us in the real estate business is the question, well, when was the last time the 10-year Treasury was at 3%? And since then, how have various asset classes performed on rents? Well, last time we were at 3% on the 10-year yield was 2018. That was not a bad economic time. And since then, the interest rates coming down and then going back up, industrial rents have increased 23%, apartment rents are up 22%, self-storage rents are up almost 13%. Now, retail and office haven't seen a whole lot of rent growth for obvious reasons, but the fundamentals of real estate have more than offset what it is that we're experiencing so far. The question is, how much further will interest rates rise, and what's really going to happen going forward? We've spent a lot of time. Our company takes a lot of pride in research. I have a research background, as you heard in my introduction, and so we take a lot of pride in providing quality, objective research to a 30-person dedicated research department. And they've crunched all kinds of models. In fact, Larry Souza, someone here in the audience who I've known for most of my career, who was a professor of economics and real estate, we finally found the key factor. What is the key factor in forecasting interest rates? And if you look back at the 80s, Volcker was the Fed chair, Greenspan, Bernanke, Janet Yellen, and now Powell, it seems to correlate. Other than that, there is no way to predict interest rates. So the search was on for a really short Fed governor, and they couldn't find it for Janet Yellen. I had the privilege of hosting Dr. Bernanke a couple of times. The first time I hosted him, I actually put this up, and he couldn't stop laughing. He said, I have that picture in my office. It never occurred to me that we correlate with the interest rate trend. So interest rates are headed up. That's where it's going. And that's where they should be going. And the adjustment is going to be somewhat painful, but not as bad as it seems, in my opinion. I'll tell you why. So we have this inflation problem. When was the last time anybody heard about an inflation problem? Inflation hasn't been an issue since the 80s, and maybe up through the mid-90s to some extent, because of the global savings glut and global competition creating a downward pressure on pricing around the world, and we haven't had an inflation problem in forever. But when you compound some of the things that have happened because of the pandemic, it's understandable as to why we're seeing. So let's take a look at some of those. First and foremost, the most important domino behind everything we're experiencing right now, and why the Fed has to be so aggressive, starts right here with liquidity and money supply. If you go back to 1960, the gray areas of recessions, never before has the Fed had to step up and create so much liquidity as it did in 2020. I'll put it into perspective for you. In 2008, 2009, during the Great Recession, global financial crisis, it took 13 months for the government to figure out how to inject 6.5% of GDP through various stimulus. No playbook. In 2020, at the onset of the pandemic, within 7 weeks, 25% of GDP was injected into the economy. So lowering interest rates, creating liquidity, had to be done to offset the economic shutdown, unprecedented shock to the global economy. And you could argue that we went too far, you could argue that it was too much, but at the same time, if you think about the alternative, had they undershot with the stimulus, there would be deflation instead of inflation, and there would be a depression instead of a very short recession that we had. In fact, look at what happened with job growth. We lost 22 million jobs in a couple of months, the equivalent of 10 years of job growth under two different administrations, from Obama all the way through Trump. 22 million jobs have been created, wiped out in 2 months, and we're almost back at where we were in terms of job creation. Had it not been for that liquidity, that wouldn't happen as fast. And as you heard earlier, we have more job openings than we have qualified workers. The speed has a lot to do with that liquidity injection I just talked about. Look at retail sales and the power of consumption in the U.S., well ahead of where we were pre-pandemic. And at the same time, because of the economic shutdown and the ability to live our lives, there is something around $5.5 to $6 trillion of unspent money that is considered pent-up. That at some point, as we see, is coming back into the economy. I was just in Las Vegas at the retail convention, the ICAC convention. 22,000 people were there. Life is back. Everyone's eager to get out. It's lovely to be out with all of you and shake hands and say hello to people face to face. This is a reflection of this pent-up demand being released. This is why I don't worry too much about a recession. Yes, the Fed has to be very aggressive. Maybe it'll cause a technical recession. But it's happening at a time when we have the consumer is in great shape. We are creating jobs, even if that job growth goes to zero for a while. The economy has the foundation to withstand it. In 08-09, our banking system was sick. Banks were not liquid. We had a liquidity problem in corporate America. Cash reserves were at an incredibly low point. The reverse was true going into 2020. Both the banking system and corporate America were incredibly well capitalized. So that's why we don't really have a crack in the foundation. It's a cyclical recession that the Fed has to cause to bring out inflation. The composition of retail has changed a lot. You just saw the graph on consumption. Much change is upon us. In fact, pre-pandemic, your deliveries look something like this, and today probably looks more like this. People seem to be consuming at an unbelievable rate, and they want that deodorant within 2 hours. I mean, you just have to have this stuff. We're all guilty of it. And the pandemic brought a lot of online shoppers that had not been online shoppers before. So if you look at the trajectory of all this, it means change. It's not the same dollars being spent. It's the same dollar being spent in a different way. And what's happening with retail real estate, the brick and mortar world of real estate, is one example of how this behavioral change is here to stay. We'll talk about that in a moment. If you're wondering what this person's doing and why it matters, I'm going to take you back in time to 2004 to 2007. This is essentially the process of qualifying for a home loan, where you could pretty much get a no doc loan that you could plug in here. And people did. People were buying multiple homes with no doc loans. The subprime crisis that created the great financial crisis was brewing at that time. We have nothing like that happening currently. Underwriting is staying fairly disciplined by the banking system. Yes, housing is at an unbelievably record level of pricing and so on. But take a look at the supply demand. If you look at that period between 03 to 06, where we were clearly overbuilding housing, which led to the crash, and then we were underbuilding housing for multiple years, and ended up with 2.5 or 2.1 million units of pent-up demand or undersupply. And in the last few years, we built a little bit more than the household formation rate by about 1.8. But if you net over the last 10 years, housing construction has been very well balanced with household formation. And therefore, this crack, people were not falling in there to get home loans in this last cycle as they were. And that's one of the reasons for my optimism. So here's house prices, median home price going up 15% last year. Unbelievable and clearly unsustainable. And of course, the supply of available homes is a big part of that as well. You could argue that we now are underbuilding housing because of the supply chain problems. So we take this liquidity, we take this recovery in consumption, we take this recovery in jobs, put on top of that the supply chain problems around the globe, where at any given time right now 20+% of the fleet of cargo ships are adrift and have been an obstacle to delivery of goods around the globe. And why don't you add in a war in Europe and spiking energy prices to see what happens? So here we are, having to deal with this. So I think a little patience and a little sympathy for the Fed in first maybe going aggressive, which I think was the right decision, instead of stimulating the economy. Let's take a look at the reality on the ground. This is median home prices today versus pre-pandemic. Think about this. The top markets are on the left. The lowest growth markets are on the right. These median home prices are up 55% since the onset of the pandemic. 55%. Austin, Atlanta, Charlotte, Inland Empire, Salt Lake City, Tampa, Orange County. The San Jose metropolitan area is up 40%. And it's in the top 10, but as you can see on the lower side of the equation. The other markets are only up a measly 13 to 30%. San Francisco's metro being 30%. U.S. home price, median home price is up 36% in 2 years. That's not sustainable. Is it a bubble? Is it going to crash? I don't think so, for the reasons we talked about. Underwriting, stay disciplined, and we're not overbuilding. So it's just a reaction to that liquidity that has to get wrung out of the system. Are we going to see it flatten out and decline in some interest? I think it's inevitable. But is that a crash and a systemic bubble? I don't think so. Take a look at the affordability gap in the Bay Area by Metro as a result of all this, where the average payment of a median priced home is compared to the average monthly rent for each metro. And affordability is undeniable and getting worse. So the demand for apartments here to stay. Obviously, if anything, an acute problem for the lower income segment of the population. That's why we want to do more to create affordable housing. Record amount of demand. This is net absorption of apartments across the U.S. First quarter on an annual run rate of 712,000 units, by far more than we've ever seen before. So people who were buying homes can no longer afford them because the price and interest rates combination, parsing them out of the market, are coming back into the rental market. We started to publish this at the onset of the pandemic so we can share with our clients our views on the impact of what was going on by property type. So the green to the red meaning the least affected and best performing on the green side of the equation and the most affected on the red side of the equation. With life sciences, warehouse distribution, suburban multifamily properties, affordable housing, including mobile home parks, by the way, and necessity retail. Single-tenant retail performed extremely well during the pandemic. 50 to 70% of those businesses' revenues through drive-thrus. And guess what? Put on top of that the delivery systems, the delivery services, Uber Eats and DoorDash and everybody else that's popped up. It's incredible to see how well that segment of retail is done. Whereas, lower tier, third rung shopping centers are currently estimated to be the worst performing, all within retail. So the point of this is our industry provides a lot of options, low yield, low risk, high return, and everything in between. And this is what I love about our industry. The plus signs, by the way, show relative improvement over the last 6 months. And so you get an idea of how much better student housing is doing, and how much better manufactured housing and affordable housing is doing because of the tremendous demand. And even like urban multifamily starting to show recovery. But I see a lot of opportunities, especially having just come from Las Vegas with the shopping center I mentioned, in reimagining and repositioning, renovating older shopping centers to something new. One of the things we monitor a lot is the spread between interest rates and real estate cap rates. You could argue that cap rates should go up. If you look at the spread and you had a time machine, you would use this one slide to go back and buy more real estate when the spread was high. So 2011, 2012, it was a 500 basis point spread between cap rates and interest rates. Mind you, if you look at this chart on cap rates, the only time cap rates in our industry have really gone up measurably was in 2000 and 2009. Other than that, it's been flat to a downward trend. So cap rates are pretty sticky. We are seeing price adjustment as justified because of higher interest rates. The most expensive, highly appreciated assets have to come down on valuation. It's basic math. And so far, we've seen sellers be pretty realistic about making that adjustment, mainly because it has so much appreciation. That adjustment to meet the market so far hasn't been an obstacle. But when we zoom out again and think about the global capital markets and where you can put your money, U.S. commercial real estate at somewhere between 5 and 6% yield, which doesn't include all the tax advantages of our sector, looks really good compared to corporate bonds and of course, 10-year treasury and other global forms of return in this environment, especially in an inflationary environment where commercial real estate is clearly viewed as an inflation hedge. What's happening about within markets and submarkets? I wanted to just give you a quick snapshot of urban versus suburban. Take a look at the apartment vacancies that shot up in urban America during the pandemic and very quickly recovered. But on the office side of the equation, no surprise, those vacancies are staying very high, and they're going to stay very high. Nobody seems to be requiring people to come back to work full time in the physical office. I believe the virtual and hybrid combination is here to stay. I think it's the new way of life. But I think companies are going to require at least 2 to 3 days a week. Even tech companies that are now taking on much more office space, I'll show you a couple of examples, are going to rely on a few days in the office for the collaboration and the teamwork, but not full time. And more and more companies are relying on virtual work execution. That is bad news for office space demand in the short run, next 12 to 18 months. Eventually, as this economy grows, 10 years from now, when we look back at my little alien abduction example, I think we're going to see so much new demand that it will backfill the void that's being created over the next couple of years. And it also means we really don't need to construct any more office buildings. And so the renovation of older product, here's some examples of recent major leases or acquisitions of office buildings by tech firms. So they're believing that at some point in the future, the demand is going to be there for the footprint, for the square footage per worker, but in a different configuration, sure. Mostly promoting teamwork and collaborative use of office space. For us in California, a couple things I just wanted to share before I wrap up. One is the fact that we are on the losing side of the demographic movement. People are moving to Florida, Texas, Arizona, the Carolinas, and that's here to stay. The pandemic accelerated that. And California, at some point, I think will wake up to the fact that if you're not business friendly, you're going to lose companies and people. I know that's a really complex thought, but at some point, I think the state will wake up to it. The fundamentals of the advantages of California, especially because of its educational institutions like this one, should not be written off. But we're going to have some pain as we compete with these other states. I mean, New York, Illinois, Massachusetts, no surprises on this chart. And how do we reposition the state to be competitive in attracting businesses and people? We have a long way to go. There's definitely a rotation going on in terms of market preferences. This is a cap rate spread among primary markets, tertiary markets, and secondary markets. And you see 06, 07, the spread by market quality pretty much went out the door. And at 60 bips, from the primary market to the tertiary market, it's a 60 bip spread, which means nobody's really underwriting risk. And that widened back to 220. We're back down to 120 now. As the market gets tight with interest rates rising, the economy slowing, primary metros like San Jose, like the Bay Area, are actually going to be winners in that equation. As so much capital has been going to secondary and tertiary markets, that's going to look back at primary markets. This is a positive sign for us in the Bay Area. And on the job growth side of the equation, you see how the Bay Area performed throughout this last cycle, but took it harder during the pandemic, and is now starting to outperform again in terms of job creation. We were a laggard, and so we have more of a runway than some of these growth markets. That's another piece of good news for us. The housing shortage, this is the 5-year forecast of jobs by metro for the Bay Area versus housing construction. It's a massive, massive gap of expected job creation versus housing. Some of these jobs actually may not get created because of the housing shortage. And I think more and more companies are actually going to get involved with the real estate community and the public sector to solve this problem. I was just in an event where I was talking to the mayor of Boston that's about to take on the rent control debate, and I was just begging her to take time to understand that rent control only discourages new development, new investment, and shortens the supply. It doesn't solve the problem. It sounds sexy, but it really is not. Here's a quick snapshot of each of the key product types. You see the multifamily agency in the Bay Area has recovered very rapidly. And the only reason San Francisco has a high vacancy rate is because of the city. If you get out of the city, the vacancies are extremely low. On the industrial side, same thing. The industrial has done so well because of global trade. I know it's disrupted right now, but also the e-commerce integration with warehouse distribution has been a phenomenal generator of new demand, leaving a lot of functional obsolescence in its wake. There's a lot of old industrial that, like old shopping centers, just needs to be, it's not overbuilt, it's just underdemolished. And that's going to catch up with itself. Retail, actually, I'm very optimistic about retail, believe it or not. I really think retail is a great opportunity because of consumer strength. And we're doing very well in the Bay Area. Higher income levels really support a great outlook. Office is the one I worry about the most, at least in the short term. You could argue that it's a diamond in the rough. You could argue that converting a Class B office to a B plus or an A could be a great play. But that would be, in my opinion, one of the higher risk, higher reward type of situations with patient capital. But there's not as much recovery by a long shot on the office side of the equation. Thank you for being here. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this great. I get so much energy from being around our long-term friends and clients, but also the fresh energy of the students. I did this around the country, and it's a true pleasure to be part of it. Marcus Millichap is here to create opportunities. We have various internship programs. We have a phenomenal presence in the Bay Area. Thanks to long-term loyal people like Sam Jones, who define our company. And I want to thank him for asking me or being a promoter of Marcus Millichap and coming here today and sharing your thoughts with you. So thank you very much. Great.
Hello. Awesome. So what are the long-term trends you see happening to office spaces in Silicon Valley, and how are leaders of Silicon Valley creating an environment for companies to continue to utilize office spaces in the area?
Yeah, as I said, I think the office configuration is going to change significantly. We're going to see a hell of a lot more, even more than we've seen, collaboration space, design space, team meeting space, much less reliance on private offices. The old sort of the law firm format is out and collaboration is in. I think office hoteling is the key. We're looking at all of our leases that are rolling over right now as a company across 80 markets. And I can tell you, we're not shrinking our footprint, but we're looking at ways to use the same footprint to support and train and develop and nurture a lot more people. And you do that with hoteling, you do that with a lot of team space. So the configuration is going to change, in my opinion, significantly. The footprint is going to shrink in the short term. I think the most pain is going to be felt when the current leases roll over, which on average is 3.5 years from now. The current leases that are in place have an average of 3.5 years left. But it all depends on the market. I mean, some of the pockets in Southern California where I know we're having lease expirations, there's hardly any vacancy. And those landlords are requiring 10-year leases at very competitive rates because they can justify it. Pockets of Florida where companies have migrated, they don't have enough office space. So there's a mean development boom going on in parts of Texas and Florida. It all depends on the sub-market configuration. But overall, at a macro level, I'm most concerned about the short to mid-term outlook for offices.
Hello.
Hi there.
So you touched a little bit on inflation as well as affordability, and I was curious if inflation will help drive up returns of commercial real estate as expected, or will affordability, regulation, and migrations to less expensive options prevail?
Great question. But that's a nice softball. So I do think that in the short term, next 12 to 18 months, real estate will be very compelling in an inflationary environment. Apartment rents roll over once a year. You have a chance to adjust, unless you're in a rent control environment. That's why rent control is such a hindrance, I think, to the entrepreneurial nature of our business, but also to serve the community. You have to have investors. You have to have developers who are enticed to participate. That's why, in my opinion, it's all about the public-private partnership. Self-storage units turn over once a year. Hotels turn over nightly. And so the inflation-adjusted performance of those asset classes are going to attract a lot of capital. Even single-tenant net lease, which of course is on long-term leases, those that have fairly short terms left are trading better. And those on long-term leases, if they're with a quality, high credit corporate tenant, they're trading just fine because all those 10,000 baby boomers that turn 65 today, they need to park their capital somewhere without having to do a lot of management. So the demand for real estate is just so strong across the board, both domestically and globally, that I think we're going to do really, really well in the next 12 to 18 months. After that, if all you're counting on is these double-digit rent growth numbers because there's inflation, at some point, that tenant won't be able to afford the rent, and they're going to double up, or they're going to move even further out, or whatever. So I think it kind of runs its course. But I think by that time, either a Fed-induced recession or just these higher interest rates is going to take the froth out of the marketplace, where we should start to see the inflation curve, begin to go down again, and hopefully by then the supply chain problem will have been resolved around the globe. And I hope the strategy war comes to an end sooner than later. So there's reason to think that 12, 18 months from now we won't have as much pressure. Either way, commercial real estate I think is a great investment alternative in a global market environment. Thanks for asking the question. Great question.
I don't know if this is on. I'm Stan Jones, and I just wanted to jump up here for a minute. Usually I'm up there, and I opted out this year, but I wanted to reach out and do a very special thank you to Hassam. He and I have been very close friends for many, many years. I've ruined multiple family vacations of his over the years. Asking him to helicopter in and do things like this, so at least been consistent. Anyway, we've talked a lot about real estate. You've seen what Hassam does as a CEO. A lot of times in this day and age, CEOs get a really bad rap. So in the spirit of Santa Clara University and what you were all about and what this school is all about, I asked Hassam if I could share a little personal story of Hassam. I always reflect on how somebody can do what he does. By the way, he hasn't been home more than 8 hours in the last 2 weeks, I think. But he's here from Las Vegas to do this. And he is maybe one of the most humble people that I've ever met. He embraces everything that this university tries to teach and everything that the student body reflects. When Hassam was 15 years old, his family had immigrated from Iran, and the revolution occurred, and the Shah fell, and his family had no assets that they could get out of Iran, and they had family there and no money. So Hassam's parents came to him and said, we have to go back and solve this problem. We'll try and come back. They gave him $400? $200? Yeah. Something like that. Yeah, keys to about a 10-year-old used car, and said, we're out. That's his story. So when things look like they're a little rough, that's what made the person that's been here and shared his time with us today. And that's an important part of the other side of Hassam Naji that very much parallels what this university does and is an important part of the script. So I just wanted to thank you very much for being here, my friend, and just an awesome human being. So thank you.
Thank you.
So my name is Kelly Hussar. I'm the design director of People at Kensler, for those of you who don't know. We're an architecture and design firm. I specialize in workplace, and I've done that at Kensler for the last 15 years. And I have my colleague, Lauren, on screen, who's going to introduce herself.
Hi everyone, I'm Lauren Rundell. I'm a senior strategist and researcher at Kensler. I'm joining you virtually, so hello.
So we're going to jump into, Lauren's going to share her screen, and we're going to jump into essentially both of us, she's a strategist, I'm a designer, and what we're seeing in workplace, which is something both of us have been doing for years. Obviously, the pandemic caused a pretty big shift in the way that we think. For us, maybe not so much, but for our clients, I think it's been a pretty radical change. So Lauren.
Yeah, so obviously we know the office will never be the same over the last 2 years plus with the pandemic, with the great reshuffle or resignation or whatever you want to call it. And really the way that we're thinking about the future of work is, especially for the near term, that it's going to be a workplace experiment. And that's something that's really exciting to us, it's exciting to a lot of our clients. But what's interesting about it is that that experiment deals with a really nuanced experience that people have had, and a really diversified experience that people have had. And a lot of clients are seeing, different populations of people that they have working who have never come into the office before, have never been part of that culture before. So we're really seeing kind of this really, really big spectrum of experience and trying to design for that. And so it's kind of an interesting kind of paradox and diversity here between all these different themes that people have experienced, and now they're bringing in the new experience of the last few years of maybe working from home and all the positives and negatives back into the office as well. So we really think that the future of work has a lot to do with flexibility and intentionality and self-determination, and that we both need the office and the home, and that we can kind of try to supersede that binary at the same time.
Well, for those of you who don't know, we have a research institute. Wow, this sound is amazing. So this is a slide actually from 2021 from our research, which really breaks out, hybrid work preferences across industries, and it's used from completely remote to, working in the office. And one of the things Lauren and I were talking about earlier is when you look at this research from just a year before, tech, which is primarily the industry that Lauren and I work in, actually was skewing the highest at remote work, and now they're in the middle of the run. So I think even a year in, we're starting to see that this will continue to evolve over time, and this data is already almost a year old at this point. And so what we're seeing is this is an evolution. What you're seeing today will not necessarily be tomorrow. So there's room for growth and a lot of opportunity. The next slide is what we like to call ripped from the headlines. So for those of you who read the New York Times, Washington Post, Bloomberg, these are some recent articles that have come out around kind of the future of work and hybrid. And I think what's fundamentally true is that we've been out of the office for 2 years, and the disruption has been so great that fundamentally things have to change, and the office will never be the same. But we have a super positive outlook on the future, and I'm not just saying this because technically my job depends on workplace design, but we do think that hybrid can be the best of both worlds. And so we have 4 themes that we're going to walk you through that are conversations we've been having with our clients, actual project work that we can start to show you that shows how these 2 worlds are starting to live together with intentionality, Lauren said.
So the first theme is really, guiding the future of work is really about how we think about space and amenities and how that's shifting. So it's really shifting from providing the employee with stuff to supporting the whole selves of employees. And that really translates into a number of different shifts that we see in terms of amenity spaces and other things. Really the well-being just as an amenity is sort of a bolder approach at this point, and people are really thinking about how can we expand and really think about providing and designing for the whole selves of employees above and beyond that. So that really means that things like game rooms and dry cleaning, not that they're being left behind necessarily, but they're really being added into the mix in terms of thinking about designing for neurodiversity, giving people choice, a lot of choice and spectrums of choice. Changing how the food is being delivered and who is delivering the food in terms of kind of a buffet approach to a more curated approach. In terms of interacting with the outdoors, we're seeing a lot more immersive outdoor workplaces that don't just involve places to eat and places to sit on a bench, but are really kind of integrating a lot of different work modes and work types and spaces all together outside. And the last one is really about this acknowledgement that, it's sort of moved from sick days to kind of the understanding that people have a mental health, they have mental health breaks and they need to take those sometimes, and ideally we take them collectively as well. So there's also a policy angle to this shift. This particular project we wanted to share with you really took the question of how might this client be the employer of choice for the future workforce, and what really came out of this project was that mental health, well-being, and kind of plugging into purpose and values and community were really kind of top of mind for the future workforce. And it's obviously a changing workforce. You know, millennials and Gen Zs are making up 64% of the workforce by 2025. So we're a majority of the workforce at that point. And all of these things, I think, are really coming to the fore. So this particular project was trying to understand that and respond. What is the future workplace? What is this kind of new paradigm that we can be providing? And how might we be designing for the whole selves of that future workforce through kind of shifting our different paradigms of workplace? So this particular kind of concept set, if you will, is really exploring how do we unpack sort of the scale of a campus? How do we make it less sort of monolithic and more of a third space that fits in with somebody's life as well as with their work, provides flexibility, enables them to kind of plug in their passions and their purpose, and a lot of different things. So it's kind of not just a small office or a co-working site, it's a lot of things to do with their whole selves. And one of these typologies has a lot to do with learning. So it's this approach of how can we provide for learning and growth as sort of that positive psychological side of well-being and of supporting someone's whole self. So what might this space be and how might someone be interacting with it? And ideally, this is something that you can leave campus and go here for a day, for a week, for a couple of hours, and really kind of engage and learn and maybe engage in your career as part of a portfolio career instead of a kind of linear path. So this project explored these things. I'll share a different typology with you a little bit later as well.
So what we're starting to look at, and you'll see through several of the examples that we'll show you, is really looking at this as a spectrum, not only of space types, but also scale. And so, you know, what we're showing here is, if you think about back in the day, you know, the biggest amenity for mental health was honestly just like a wellness room where you could like shut the door, cry, take a nap, whatever you needed to do. And so now we're starting to look at, you know, understanding that people reset their brains differently. Some people need more of a tranquil, you know, kind of green outdoor space. Some people actually need a creative outlet, and some people need, you know, energy, whether that's virtual or, you know, physical activity. And next, what we're also starting to see, so while I completely agree that, you know, the future of the office is more about, you know, kind of coming together and collaboration, we do need to acknowledge that there needs to be a space for focus and for private time. And so one of the things we're looking at, this is actually a project I'm working on in Omaha, Nebraska, which is where I'm from, where we're looking at deep focus. And so that's a space where it's obviously, you know, technology free, which we've looked at, you know, previously with library spaces at tech companies, but this is really about creating a physical environment that actually creates more of a, you know, kind of physical cocooning and visual privacy over, you know, kind of yourself, and also starts to look at the play of materiality, and is there a difference between people who go to spaces that are a bit more lighter and brighter versus people that are looking for something that's a bit more, you know, kind of dark and moody, and so providing that spectrum in the built environment. And then these are kind of hot off the press from November. So this is the first phase of that project I was talking about, where we're elevating the F&B, you know, the food and beverage experience for a company in Omaha, Nebraska. And it's really about, you know, if you think about previously, especially tech companies, it was all about the giant cafeteria, the kind of food court in the mall. And this is really about creating these smaller, more intimate scale dining environments that have a cohesive look and feel, but start to, you know, kind of break down the style so that depending on, you know, the group of people, the amount of people that are trying to eat together, you can find a spot that's right for you. And then the food and beverage offerings are highly distinct in this as well. So these are just a couple pictures of that. These are actual LinkedIn employees, not models. They're really happy about their new office. And then the last piece of this, which I think, you know, all of us benefit from, especially being, you know, in this area, is really this, you know, more intentional connection to the outdoors. And so creating outdoor workplace, as Lauren talked about earlier, where it's not just about picnic tables and a bench, but it's really about creating outdoor environments. You know, LinkedIn, especially in Sunnydale, has been great about creating outdoor meeting rooms that that serve not only the ability for people to come together and have lunch, but there's actual technology out there people can work. And so it's really broadening essentially your real estate footprint by taking over a lot of this outdoor space for workplace. Call it the threshold. The next theme is really what we're calling, from checking a box to building a foundation. And this has two parts. I'll go to the first one, and Laura will talk about the other one. But a lot of what everybody's been concerned about, and I have to say it's not been solved, is really this equity of experience for those who are physically in the office and for those who are remote. And so looking at how can we create that equity across, the spectrum of the hybrid workplace. And so this section is really focused on meetings, workshops, events, and things like that. So an example that we're building for Gusto, which is a kind of HR and benefits platform for small to medium-sized businesses. We're building this in New York. And so what we're calling Gusto Studios is essentially a forum where they can bring their customers in to talk about their product. We did a ton of research with them, and one of the biggest things we found is their employees actually want a stronger connection to their customers and to help them build better products for them. So this provides a platform that can allow that to happen, that is created physically within the office space, but also as a virtual component. And then, in its downtime, it can be used for things like TED Talks or a team meeting. So everything's got kind of double duty. The next example, we actually worked with LinkedIn almost 2 years ago, and this was the notion of the neighborhood hub. And so they have a model where they're free addressed by neighborhood. So a team owns 30 to 40 desks, but they're not assigned to any one person. And so what do you do with tchotchkes and all of your pandemic puppy pictures? And so the idea with the neighborhood hub that became the rail car for Omaha was to create a centralized location where teams could come together. You can, impromptu meet. There's a dashboard that lets you know where your coworkers are. There's storage where you can put your bowling trophies or whatever is important to you guys as a culture. There's also locker storage because we've taken that away from the physical desk, and so you need a place to put your things that's convenient. So it's like you've got the cute rendering, and then we have real life next to it, which is, it's fun to see these things kind of come to fruition. And we're not just like, selling renderings right now, but we're actually building stuff, which is pretty cool. The next little iteration of this is a project I'm working on in actually downtown Oakland, where there's a company that has a major headquarters in San Francisco, but they have 700 people that live in Oakland. They don't want to come to San Francisco anymore, and so how do we build space for them to connect? So this is an office space that we'll talk a little bit more about later, but the type of spaces that we're building there are more about people coming together. We're calling this the backyard. It's the top of a building downtown, but it's really important for them to bring kind of the outdoors in. So how do we facilitate both technology and green space coming together for shared kind of community gathering and team camaraderie and culture building. Another version of the rendering, it's a little bit sadder. We're working on fixing this.
And this is just an example of some of the research that we've been doing internally on ourselves at Gensler and also with clients in terms of really exploring how can we make the collaborative experience equitable across a virtual and in-person participant set. And this is also kind of referred to as meeting inclusivity, but we've been really digging into how can you break that down and how can you sort of study these things. And it really seems to be like the three kind of parts of this Venn diagram are really where it's rolling up. So how can we understand the sense of presence that somebody has in the collaborative experience? How can we understand whether they're understanding and navigating interpersonally appropriately? And how can they have the ability to participate verbally or non-verbally and feel like that's inclusive of them and potentially equitable to others in the meeting as well. So we're having a lot of these kind of interesting research explorations of the hybrid experience as well. So the other piece of this theme is really about how do we design for inclusivity from the start, not just to satisfy a particular affinity group. And this one is really about, oopsies, here we go. This theme is also about culture. A lot of what we find, especially with clients where they're coming back to the office in certain ways and they're trying to integrate new people into their work rhythms and work policies and practices, is that culture is a really big piece of that, and understanding how culture can kind of exclude or include is another piece. So one of the ways that we like to talk about culture is that there's a big difference between what's expected culturally of people, so that's kind of the explicit value set that a company might have, and also what's tolerated in terms of the behaviors that people see and also do in their work. So a lot of the things that we're finding culturally are indicative of kind of a broader culture of work that we're hoping can shift. And this hopefully can be a piece that culturally we can work on, not just with this client, but with others as well. But really to understand, how are people approaching their work? What have they internalized in terms of how do you show up as an ideal worker? And how do we help kind of move the lever on these things culturally, so that we can be designing for people more holistically and more inclusively as well. So these are things that kind of, at least they really resonate with me in terms of my work history and sort of what I've understood of how I should be showing up at work. And I think culturally there's a lot to do in terms of unpacking these beliefs with people, and managers are kind of like another crux of the matter here as well. This is a great example as well of designing with inclusivity in mind, and this is taking a very sensory approach to that. And I mentioned before how there's really this idea of a spectrum of designing for choice in terms of designing for neurodiversity. So this is a really great example of a lot of different sensory spaces that we've been coming up with to really get at that kind of hypo to hyper stimulation spectrum, and also to get a sensory experience for people that's not just an individual sensory experience, but could also be a team sensory experience as well. So there's a lot of different angles here that it can be really interesting for space types. Another element of designing with inclusivity in mind is really about how can you provide for things and not necessarily add a lot of things to the space, but potentially remove things. This is an example of understanding how designing for people using wheelchairs might work, especially in an event space or a group collaboration space. And if they come up and they need to pull up their wheelchair somewhere and there's already a chair there, that is inherently kind of not an inclusive spatial gesture for them, and they might have to handle that chair and move it away. So are there ways we can design for space where they can pull up a wheelchair and be welcome in that space without having to change it and move it around for them to be there?
And then our third thing is really, going from a daily grind, which is, well, for those of you who haven't worked, I don't know what to tell you. You have a whole experience. This is a lesson effort. Going from a daily grind to coming together with purpose. And I do think that this is really the picture that, as it was said so eloquently, before, it's about creating spaces that have intentionality and that are about us collaborating together for a very specific reason, and not just showing up and hoping that you run into somebody, but that we're coming together with a plan, and it's actionable and we can move forward, and people can work from home when they want to. But what we're starting to see is, in order to enable that to happen, people don't want to come back to a sad conference room or a sad training room where you sit in all day and you just stare at the same, kind of beige or gray walls that you had before. So having an environment that really thinks about operating an office like a hotel. So having more of a concierge service, having the ability for people to not meet your needs in a way that's pandering, but to really kind of create an environment that feels, kind of frictionless. The idea that events are more about the production of the event. If you think about, our model even in our own office was our all hands, you were expected to be there in person. Now that's not the case. We have, remote colleagues who will always be remote, and so how do we create an event that makes them feel as connected and as a part of that, if they're not physically there? Flexible neighborhood planning. There are still some companies that are, following the model that they had before. Luckily, most of our clients are pushing, to really push the boundaries of what that could be, and so looking at ways that we can go from a kind of normative kind of neighborhood layout to something that's actually way more interesting and conducive to the way people want to work when they're coming to the office. And then really, not pushing, but really recognizing that culture building is the priority. I think, we saw, the people that we were working with before, it was easy to start working remotely because there was so much trust, built in the relationship. We had been together, we had worked together before. And what you started to see is that people that you hired through the pandemic that had never had that office experience, it was harder, to bring them on board and to really create that culture. And so it is important that we come together and we break bread and we celebrate, the rhythms and the things that make our culture special in our workplace and as companies. So these are just a few examples. When we talk about flexible neighborhood planning, this is a study we did for LinkedIn where we took a pretty standard, center core rectangle building, and we planned it with, kind of several different neighborhood scenarios, everything from what we would call one-to-one seating, so everybody has a desk, to a more dynamic work environment, to this, which is what we're calling space on demand. So the idea here is that you're creating a flexible environment where teams could essentially opt in and reserve it for a week. Maybe half the team is remote, half the team is local, and they want to come together to solve some sort of problem, a campaign, some sort of product launch, and they can use this space. It has everything at their fingertips. There's a layer of, maybe kind of traditional desking, but a layer of flexibility that's built in. Some visuals around that floor plan for those of you who like floor plans. But the idea here again is that, this is a pretty standard, kind of 45-foot depth from core to facade, which is a lot of the buildings that we work with. And so it's really easy to essentially leave the kind of chassis of the built architecture the same. All you're doing is switching out furniture to make something that's actually more dynamic for the teams that are coming in. So if we take team and we go a little bit bigger, this was a study we did that's looking at more of a hospitality-driven collaboration hub. And so the idea here is that you have this spectrum from kind of lounge, F&B, to flexible meeting space and then breakout space coming together in a relatively small footprint. And the idea is that a lot of things can do double duty. You can have multiple teams meeting at the same time. Breakout, you can all come together. But it's again built with a bit more purpose, and it isn't just a traditional kind of reception area with a formal kind of waiting area and a meeting space, but it really is about creating an environment that feels more about people coming together. And then if you, kind of put it on crack, this is a larger version that we've been studying with a client called on-site, off-site. So, a lot of companies, our own included, would take people from all over the world and send them to some sort of, resort or terrible hotel conference center where they all have to collaborate and set goals and do really important things together. But if you have a percentage of your employees that don't actively work in your office space or on your campus, there's a benefit to bringing them to your campus so that they really do get to experience the culture. So making the investment in a more hospitality-focused meeting place that is about, flexible large meeting, breakout space. Again, that kind of bigger connection to the outdoors, hospitality, bar in the center, that's kind of like coffee and breakfast by morning, lunch, and then kind of post-meeting cocktails, in the evening.
And our last theme here is really about how we are moving from a sort of siloed approach to a more integrated community approach. And this has a lot of different kind of layers and meaning to it. The idea here is that there's really an understanding of the workplace as an ecosystem now, and that this is kind of involving a lot of different stakeholders in that ecosystem. So these are really kind of all layering together to create that experiential lens for dealing with, design and how we can kind of provide for employees. So you've got your whole mix of different stakeholders in terms of HR, legal, operations, IT, product teams, corporate comms, and everybody is coming together to work with facilities and real estate as part of this ecosystem. The other piece that's a really interesting player is that the local community has become a much more an important stakeholder in the mix here as well. And there's a number of different ways that we've seen kind of community either be integrated into our projects, or hopefully in the near-term future be integrated as well. This is another typology from the project I shared with you a bit earlier. And this is really the idea of kind of turning that dial up to 10 on how do we build community, how do we help our employees really use their passions for the community as well, and how do we let the community in? So if this is kind of a smaller space, it's sort of a hub and spoke model of a space, how can this be really useful for a community event, or useful for somebody to engage with their children potentially, or their aging parent, or something they might need to engage with while they also are doing work. So how can we kind of catalyze the community as something that's in the day-to-day kind of work life of a person?
And then this was a project I was talking about earlier that's in downtown Oakland. And what I love about this project that's about to start construction is that it's built as 100% free address. So there are no assigned teams, there are no assigned seats. And really what we've done is we've created behavior-focused floors. So we have 4 floors. The 15th floor is all about focus. So if you're on this floor, it's all about working alone. There's no expectation of really, talking to people. And the materiality, the furniture, the amenities support that more kind of individually focused work. The second is all about collaboration, so that brings it up to more of like 2 to 6 people. And so the scale of the room starts to increase, the transparency of the materiality starts to increase. The social floor is the next one, and that's really all about larger teams coming together, so project rooms. It's really more about a lot of kind of active activity, and at the very top is their food and event space. But what I love about this also is that they dedicated a third of this top floor, which is their main reception, the top of the building, to outside community spaces. So really engaging in programs with Girls Who Code and other local Oakland nonprofits that have actually lost a lot of their either funding or spaces during the pandemic, and dedicating that space to that will only be for them. So really being a true community partner in downtown Oakland, which is pretty impressive. And then a smaller version is a part of what we did at LinkedIn Omaha, which is what they call In Common. So dedicating a part of their entry experience to outside nonprofits that can come in. This is more of a ground floor experience. It provides dual use, where it's used by LinkedIn employees, but it's also leveraged for nonprofits. So a slightly different way of making that happen. But I think what I love is that these companies that we work with are really recognizing how important the community they're going into is, and really creating an active response to be able to provide spaces for them to do that. A slightly different version, and we're done, I promise. Is the customer pop-up. So this is actually creating a space, a retail space within the office environment. We're building this for them in Denver, where they're what they call customers can come in and actually set up a kind of a pop-up retail space, so that again Gusties, the Gusto employees can come in, understand what their customers are buying, serving. You could buy fresh flowers, you could buy pottery. I joke you could get a tattoo, but I don't know if anyone can do that. But the other piece of the puzzle is actually connected to an app that we're developing with them. And so that's what we're calling Gusto to Go. And so it's creating a database of their customers by location. So as they're in different markets around the country, they can start to tap into their clients and leverage their services. So it just, again, connects them to their clients with greater purpose. I think that's all we have.
Before we get started, I'd like to invite everyone in the back who didn't get a chance to sit down to please sit down in the front if you would like to.
Yeah, feel free to come on down. Seriously, there's a bunch of open seats up front. Well, my name is Michael Perry.
And I'm Regina Housen, and we are the co-presidents of the Real Estate Association.
First off, I want to start off with a question. What does real estate mean to you? It might be your career, it might be your passion, it might be a side hustle. You might be a first-year analyst or CEO of a company for 30 plus years. You might even be here because you heard there's an open bar and food afterwards. But really what I'm trying to say here is all of us are here because of a community that real estate has brought to us. And Regina and I are looking forward to share what that community has done for us and the school to be a part of real estate.
Yeah, so I'll get started by giving a brief overview of our presence on campus. So we have just about 500 newsletter subscribers with a 67% open rate. So that means that we have over 300 very active people looking at our emails, so we have a very strong presence here on campus. We also are involved on LinkedIn. We are a few dozen followers short from 1,000 subscribers, so our call to action today is for at least a few of you to please subscribe so we can get to over 1,000 by the end of the day. And we also are super involved on Instagram. We have our marketing soon-to-be vice president here taking over, and on all these platforms we present networking opportunities, we promote our events, and we highlight alumni and building developments around the area. And so overall, we are very excited to continue to grow our presence here and promote our club.
Yeah. So now to talk about the reason we all go to college, jobs. So over 30 companies reached out to us this past year looking for career opportunities for our students. So this year we created a job spreadsheet so students can access those opportunities. We also hosted our annual career fair this past winter where we had companies as in Google, Marcus & Millichap, JLL, and so many others. And one thing we're really looking forward to is we already start planning the next real estate club career fair in the fall. So we're looking forward to trying to double the amount of companies that one.
Another program worth highlighting is our mentorship program. We actually have a few mentors here in the crowd. We're very grateful for you all. And it's where we partner industry professionals with our students. And it's a year-long program where they can learn about what your mentor does and hopefully get involved with more people within the industry and learn about opportunities that that company or the mentor's peers can offer. We also have speaker series events which provide education to many of our members. We talk about development, construction, entitlement, anything that involves real estate. And we also have a property tour session. We are actually going to NVIDIA next week, so that's a very big program for us as well, and I think that's just about it for us.
And lastly, let's talk a little bit about NAIOP. So first off, I want you to imagine you're given a land parcel, and someone said, find the highest and best use for this land. Work with an architect and a contractor to figure out what can be constructed on this land. Find a lease-up strategy and learn how to market, and also, lastly, run the financials and figure out how can I make this thing profitable? So that's exactly what we did. For the competition, we competed against Stanford, Menlo College, and San Jose State, where we were given a land parcel and we had to figure out a development proposal for it, and we won. So that was great for the program, and we're very proud of that, as you can see the sledgehammer over there. Lastly, if the current exec team can stand up. So, not only have Regina and I been putting a lot of work this year, but we've also had the help of these amazing, incredible people who've put in just the same amount of work. So, please give a round of applause to these people. You'll all see them.
We wouldn't be where we are without this team, as well as the support from the advisory board, Emily, Jalissa, and everyone else in the community that continuously supports us always. So a big thank you to all.
So thank you so much. Reminder, follow that LinkedIn, follow that Instagram. We're really looking forward to keep in touch with the events for the future, and thank you very much.
Okay.
I feel like saying, please be seated. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Andrew, the dean of Lee School of Business, so I'm pleased to see so many folks that really support our real estate program here. I'm fairly new to the university. I started over the summer. When I started, there wasn't anyone here, so I'm so pleased to see so many folks here in person. So we heard a lot of great presentations today, and so really good information and thought-provoking. And I'm really proud of our students. So let's give our students another big round of applause. So we get to the final session, and it's a wrap up, and I know there are people anxious to stand up and do things outside, but not quite yet. We have about 30 minutes, but I promise I've been told to be on time, so don't worry about that. I also get the pleasure to introduce the panelists here. I met them for the first time today, so this is exciting for me also. And to my left here is Jeff Cushman. Jeff has over 19 years of experience in commercial real estate, and he's lived in the Bay Area over 14 years. I think that's right. And earlier I met Jeff, and he told me that his father had a big connection with the Disney company, and I worked at the Disney company over 30 years. So we were reminiscing about the real estate projects that his father worked on, and they were fantastic projects, I have to say. But he spends his time executing sizable, complex deals representing clients from across the globe. And Jeff was the recipient of 2015 Deal of the Year for a 285,000 square foot Apple lease. So that's a little small project to that. And over the course of the career, Jeff is personally involved in leasing over 20 million square feet of office space. So welcome, Jeff. Thank you. One thing I did forget to say about Jeff, he received his undergraduate and his law degree from Santa Clara. And sitting in the middle stage is Lee Wilcox. Lee is the Assistant City Manager for the City of San Jose. He's had portfolios consisting of environmental, utility services, transportation, and aviation, which includes community energy, environment services, airports, and transportation departments. And, you know, Lee had another small job during the pandemic. He coordinated the city's emergency operations center. It's a small job during the pandemic. He's born and raised in San Jose. He has his master's in public administration from the University of Colorado and his bachelor's degree from Sonoma State University. He also earned a certificate in government management and leadership from Harvard School, a little place in Boston. So, welcome, Lee. Thank you. And furthest away from me, and I just met Shannon Hardy today. She's a VP of Life's Work at LinkedIn. We heard some good stories about LinkedIn just last presentation. She has over 10 years of talent acquisition and human resource management. And she has a newly created role that she leads critical planning for the evolving work experience, ensuring teams across the country are aligned on strategy. She also has a parent company, small company, Microsoft, that she has to kind of report to a little bit, but she's telling me now we're pretty autonomous. Hopefully it stays that way, right? She's really dedicated, so she's a busy lady, and she's support causes for impoverished children and environmental awareness. She earned a bachelor's degree from the University of Santa Cruz. So, welcome, Shannon. Okay, I get to ask these. They didn't see these questions in advance, so if they stumble a bit, just kind of take it easy on them. All right, this is going to be, we'll just go on from Jeff to Lee to Shannon on this. We've talked about the changing workplace, and we know we all learned some tough lessons during the pandemic. And some of the things we rather not have gone through, but there are certainly some things that we learned during the pandemic are here to stay. So can you speak about some of those things that are going to stay with us, even though they may be tough?
I was on, 3 Zoom calls today, so I think we all probably have a love-hate relationship with that, but there's a lot of things about it I think that have been pretty good for all of us. You don't have to drive down, take an hour, 45 minutes in the car or the train to go have a meeting that maybe wasn't the most, there's meetings that we all had before the pandemic, and you probably walk out of a few of those saying, I didn't need to do that, right? So I think being on the Zoom calls has its benefits. It definitely has its detractions. I was with a lady the other night, and she said, I have to be up for a 5 a.m. Zoom call, and now I have to get my hair right, and put on my makeup for a 5 a.m. call. I said, well, maybe just turn off the Zoom camera since it's before 7 a.m. So there's a lot of things that we've all had to learn. I think one last thing is just trying to keep our balance right. You hear a lot about people saying that before the pandemic, we had that element of you go to the office and then you go home, right? And we haven't had that, or we didn't have that during the pandemic as much for a lot of us anyways. So I think trying to make sure that you focus on your own personal time and creating that space to go work out or exercise or sort of take a break. We heard about the wellness rooms, which I agree they up until a few years ago it was like a closet where you go and try to get your private space. I'm not sure how healthy that was. So I think just trying to learn from how to take a bad situation with the pandemic and make some positives out of it, like exercising, taking time, going on a walk or whatever, something like that.
Lee, how about for you?
Yeah, I think the Zoom analogies are good.
Well, one thing I have to admit, I don't have to worry about your hair and makeup anymore.
Yeah, I felt people thought I was smarter when I was off camera for some reason. No, I think it is the need to be flexible around everything. Obviously, at the city, we deal a lot with policy and operations and trying to plan out. And we're shy of 1,000 cases as of today in the county, and we weren't there, last fall. So I think the need for us to be flexible, and as much as we want to plan long-term and medium-term, just to have a constant eye in the short-term around decision-making that we're, doing, whether it's a, resource, operation, or policy. So, that's going to confuse things, in the long run for us. But I do think, in the next several years, we just need to continue to be flexible.
Absolutely. I think what we're all talking about is the silver lining learnings of the pandemic, and that's what I've coined it, just for a lack of better words, but that 60% of workers that LinkedIn surveyed would say that they would leave their job if their employer didn't match the flexibility that they wanted or needed. And so this flexibility is just now core to how employees work. And so employers have had to meet their employees where they're at and what they need. And so this shift is kind of what we're seeing with this great reshuffle or the great resignation, whatever you may call it, is that workers are going to leave unless the ethos, the flexibility, the vision and mission matches what employees want. And so it's really interesting because that dynamic has shifted. And we've seen that in the data that was presented earlier around just the abundant amount of jobs and the workers. And so it definitely is an opportunity for employees to state that they want to pursue an employer that matches what they need.
Well, let's say with that, Spencer, you mentioned about flexible work time, and we're all experiencing it. Any other things that you can do at LinkedIn that will influence behavior in the future from a positive standpoint, keep your employees or be an employer of choice?
Yeah, I think at LinkedIn and really working with a lot of the other tech companies here in Silicon Valley, what we're trying to do is to look at the behavior of our employees and why they're coming in. So the presenters from Gensler, the previous presentation, stated that employees want to come in to build connection. They want to come in to build relationships and nurture those relationships in their networks. And so building a workspace that allows for that, the dynamic neighborhoods. I'm assigned to a building that has that. I've experienced it. It's amazing. And just knowing that you can kind of reshift your workspace to meet the needs of the employees, and that will attract them to come into the office for those purposeful moments of connection, but also to understand that remote work and virtual work has had the same impact and the same amount of productivity and efficiency than employees coming into the office. So I would always recommend to other employees, do not make an assumption or do not make a decision on long-held assumptions on how work was being done. Instead, listen to your employees, see how they're behaving, meet them where they're at again, and then you can become a top-tier employer that retains employees.
Well, Lee, we're going to pick on you a little bit. You have an office, right, downtown, wherever it may be, but you have a bigger footprint you have the city to contend with. And we heard some of the presentations about migration out of California. So what are cities doing to reactivate the city to, I hate to say stop migration, but to invite people back if they want to come back to the city?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think we're actually in budget season at the city of San Jose right now. So our proposed budget, which is $5.4 billion, this budget is definitely not stepping out of the pandemic response and into recovery and addressing the larger things we need to do to kind of jumpstart the economy in some of these areas. So, the first is, at least at City Hall, the 2,000 employees in downtown San Jose, we came back as of January, even with Omicron kind of in a staged approach, very early to help, activate the downtown. And then in this year's budget, whether it's downtown, North San Jose, places like Willow Glen, and some of other business corridors, there's a host of safety resources, things about mitigating and kind of cleaning up the areas, which I'd say we lost a lot of ground in, in areas around some of our unhoused community encampments, or just the general aesthetics of the city. And then I think what Jeff is talking about is not losing ground on all the great things that the pandemic created in the way of activation in and around downtown and Willow Glen. So, from a safety standpoint, additional police officers, mobile crisis units, being able to be in these areas and help those that are in need. But then at the same point, trying to help and create more vibrancy so it feels much safer, and then we have those connections, whether in an office place or outside the office after work, which is really important in some of these urban environments.
Jeff, over to you. You talked about your business to lease space, right? And Hassan talked about short-term leases, long-term, and the short-term you can readjust, right? Are there anything different happening in the marketplace as far as what people expect in terms of the lease or duration, flexibility? Maybe talk about that.
Yeah.
From the apartment or office, whatever.
I'll answer in the context of office because that's really my background. But there's been a lot that's come from this, and I think this was a trend anyways. I actually spent 5 years in London, and if you know a little bit about our law, our common law actually really comes from England, right? And if you go over there, they used to have 20 and 25 leases, and I never understood that. I think in America, historically, were smaller, shorter term leases, maybe for a big lease, 10 or 15 years. But that trend has been pushed down even before the pandemic, that companies figured out that flexibility is critical on how, because it's very hard to, the day after you've hired everybody, you've walked into your space, the space changes, the needs change. So it's always going up and down, right? And so the pandemic, I think, just exacerbated that issue. And what you saw during the pandemic, and I see some of my competitor friends here from different brokerage houses, and I'm sure they'll agree with me, a lot of groups which had leases expiring during the pandemic were calling up the landlord, or calling up the broker to say, I just want to stay for maybe a year or 18 months because I don't know what I want or what we want. There was so much uncertainty right with the pandemic. And by the way, it hasn't really, there's still a lot of unanswered questions about where this all goes as far as how people want to utilize space. So I think we're seeing shorter terms, a lot more renewals. We haven't talked a lot today about, the WeWork dynamic. I didn't hear a lot of that, maybe a little bit, but the sort of short-term WeWork concept, I think, actually will do well coming out of COVID. Everybody knows about WeWork. They kind of had a pretty bumpy kind of crash in there. But I think there's merit behind that concept. And I think a lot of companies, big companies, can use a WeWork concept to do a 6-month transaction or a 12-month or what have you. So there's been changes, and I think we'll see the push for continued flexibility. I just say one more thing. I'm working on a pretty big lease in New York, and what we're doing in that transaction is we have the ability, after we sign the lease, to scale up by 2 floors or scale down by 2 floors within the first 18 months. And that's like 90,000 feet up or down. So we've given ourselves that flexibility. It's a pretty big lease, so the landlord has been accommodating in that regard. But you're going to see a lot more of that. Okay.
Lee, I'm going to ask you a tough question, but I'm sure you have the answer. We talked about migration, right, from California, and we talked about rent controls and things like that. It's not necessarily a good thing. From your standpoint, what do you have? I know you don't have all the answers. What are the things that you, as a city official, or you can influence the state government, that you would do to say these would be some of the things that would help stop that migration, or maybe turn people around halfway to Texas?
Another good question. I think there's a rule in government. If you can blame another government entity, it's really popular. So I actually enjoy the question. I think unfortunately, and there's it's well documented with the state, is California governable? And I'll just say I don't think it is. You have an executive branch in Sacramento. It's very fragmented. The governor doesn't pick his own lieutenant governor. There's a host of commissions that have very autonomous roles, independent. And then you have a legislature who has pretty strict term limits and in charge of policy and a budget, and the seventh largest economy in the world, and they're termed out every few years. So it creates what I like to call fragmented policy decisions, where local government, local officials, local businesses aren't very involved. And unfortunately, they're also siloed within Sacramento. So if I have my wish, and it goes beyond, I think just, it's a unbusiness-friendly culture. It's a culture in Sacramento and just a structural problem in Sacramento where decisions are made with very little input from local government, unfortunately. And we can, see a lot of those effects, whether it's, the problem we face right now with our unhoused community, affordability throughout California, or all of the regulations around SCU that make it just so time-intensive to get something across the goal line around an entitlement process where you have pretty strict, limited time frames around some of these things. And so I do think just government reform in Sacramento really needs to happen.
Can you do that?
Yeah, well, I would just say I do think it's as a bureaucrat. If the most important thing we did in the last 5 years was the pandemic, I do think the most important thing for any government official in California over the next 10 years is how we work across our own boundaries. So that we make it much more clear for residents, for the business community, on what expectations and what policies are, but also how we're properly engaging you in those decisions. The definition of politics is when all facts and data are known and you still have disagreement. And we're often waiting for decisions to get to that point versus how we all bring you in early up front in a process where we talk about here's problems, here's options to solve them, and here's where we want to go. That's where we need to be. So I do think, working across all government silos is, where I need to be and where most government officials in California need to be.
Shannon, I'm going to ask you a question about balance of power type of thing. I don't mean this in a negative way. Certainly now, employees, as you say, I think you said 60%, if you don't allow for flexible work time, they may opt for something else. And in LinkedIn, you can see a lot of activity. How is that shifting? Are employers saying, okay, this is what we have to do? Are they embracing that, or are you seeing some trying to fight that?
Yeah. So the trend right now that we're seeing is about 11% of all jobs posted on LinkedIn has a remote option or is remote only. And that's over the past 6 to 8 months. Now that increased from 1.5% in like January of 2020. So it's a significant increase. But 11% of all jobs is still a good market share of remote eligible roles, but you will still see the majority of roles that are going to be location-based. And so I think that organizations are trying to figure out how do we ensure that we embrace this flexibility, that we embrace this idea of flexibility, that we offer our employees to kind of have more autonomy over their schedules and come to the office a couple days a week, but also how to embrace this remote worker talent pool that maybe enables us to do things like go into other diverse markets that we haven't tapped into, pursue talent that we weren't able to because we were, I guess, hindered by location-based roles. And so it's opened up a lot of different opportunities for employers to, diversify, physical location, to diversify their workforce, to pursue talent at different costs in different locations. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity, but it's balanced. And so I don't see it swinging, too much to one side or another.
Okay, great. Jeff, I come to you. I've seen some great stats out there about Federal Reserve interest rates, long-term, inverted yield rates, and all those things. And when you're looking at it today, it seems like we're never going to get out of this thing. Pull back, and we've seen this before. How did your company use that information? And as you're working on deals, how do you, about human behavior, how does that work with you? It's scary for a lot of people to even commit now. So how do you convince them that it's the right thing to do or will help them along?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, I don't know if we're all, I'm trying to think about the part about convincing. I mean, it's our job to lay out the facts and try to be objective and let them make an informed decision. But I understand the point, and I think our keynote speaker is right. I mean, it's kind of going to be a scary time for a little while. And again, I'm speaking more on the office side. You saw the stats that he was putting up. I mean, there weren't a lot of good things about the office market. And I would just say this. I try to look at things in a positive light. We still live and work in one of the best parts of the world, right here. That's why a lot of us are in this room, going to school or working here. We like it here. We have beautiful weather. And we have a great economy. So you have to see through the noise. I remember I lived in San Francisco during the dot-com crash, and that was a nightmare. I remember that, but I remember looking back, saying, I maybe got too worked up or overthought it at the time, and looking back, this will too pass. But I agree with what I heard that the next 6 to 18 months is going to be pretty tricky, particularly for the office environment. I've heard some deals that have just died in the last month because there's difficulty with the debt markets. And, people do watch the equity markets too. And, the stock market, I think, again today, the NASDAQ was down. And I think we're going to see that for a while. But with all those challenges, I think come opportunity. And you'll see pricing move out. And the sellers are going to have to be maybe a little more realistic. And so that's going to create opportunities for those who believe mid and long term in Silicon Valley. We've seen this before. When I came back from New York after the great financial crisis, I was basically in New York during that, and that was pretty rough. I came back here in 2011, and everybody said how slow it was here. But as he showed, the last 10 years here have been, up until COVID, were incredible. Like some of the best years we've ever had. And I think that'll happen again. I think we're lucky, as I said, to be here. We're doing better than most places. But it's going to be a little bumpy for a while on the office side. Because a lot of these companies are still trying to figure out how they deal with the dynamic of working from home and how much space do we need. I'll just have one funny comment. A broker asked me a funny question. He said, do you think I should approach a landlord and tell them we only want to pay for 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, so the company wants to go back to work Monday, Wednesday, Friday? I said, I don't think the landlord's going to buy that argument at all. So there's a lot to work out, but it's going to be rough for a little while.
Okay, we have time probably for one more question. We have some great students here, and they're in high demand. I don't know if you know that. So I'll ask from Shannon to Lee to Jeff, what would you say to convince our students to stay here in the great state of California or in the area, San Jose? What would you be telling those students to certainly they're great places, Austin, Arizona, where those are great places where they're growing like crazy. What would you say to these students to say, let me convince you that this is the right place for you from a company standpoint or from a metropolitan area standpoint?
So I would say that here in Silicon Valley, you have the unique opportunity to have just a really great portfolio of amazing organizations to work for. And like Silicon Valley is a place of innovation, a place where we try to do things humbly, but in a very innovative, different way. And it starts here. And I feel like that's such a special place where you can work with talent, be with talent, learn from talent, develop your talent, build your portfolio, your experience, and then possibly, go to other places. But every time that I look out, even at our own geo footprint at LinkedIn, but also to our competitors, I'm seeing everything kind of starts with us here, which is great. Gain that experience, start here first, then go out and bring your talent someplace else.
Great answer. I would just start with, as our keynote speaker said, you guys are in the driver's seat. Like, we need you more than anything else right now with the labor market. I do think, there's potential, even though, we went over the facts around Phoenix, Atlanta, the Carolinas. I'll just say I've been in all those places. I wouldn't move there. There's not a lot of places where you can ski on a Monday and surf like the next and not have to drive all that far, so remember that. But I will say, the opportunity and I think just the innovation and how people think here and who's here, there's so much potential to figure out what's next. And I feel like we always actually succeed really well as a community, even when we fall into it. But even during the pandemic, we were the first most vaccinated big metropolitan area in the entire United States. And we continue that all the way to today. So no matter what we face, just the creativity and innovation and smarts that people have here is really empowering. And as you can tell from the keynote speaker, it's all interconnected. So whether you go directly into real estate or you're working around policy around real estate or just economic development, it all matters over the next 18 to 24 months to get through kind of that rough period and figure out how we get on the other side of it in a much better, prosperous way for us all.
Yeah, those are great answers. I was going to say the same thing. Surfing, you got wine tasting, everything's within 3 hours with great weather. The fact that the venture capital, I think this area, Bay Area, is still plus or minus 40-50% of all capital is generated right here. So the ideas are still coming from here. Leading up to this discussion today, I was thinking about what I said earlier about the dot-com crash. That was only 20 years ago. And I couldn't remember when Google started. I actually thought it was a few years after, but it started technically in 1998. The point is, during the dot-com crash, Google wasn't really in the conversation. It was other companies, some of you have heard, or some of the older people would know, like Pets.com, these things that were, on every thing at the Giant Stadium, right? But Facebook and Google were barely even around, and look at who they are today. So there'll be more companies like that, and they keep coming, and a lot of them come from right from here. And if you're all here because you're interested in real estate, what's really exciting, I think, is that previously being in New York City and London, those are huge real estate cities. I mean, it's known. New York City is known as it's a real estate city. We're known as a technology place, but real estate dominates more than we all appreciate right here. The size of the transactions, the size of the companies. I mean, I was talking to somebody the other day in New York. I think Google has 5 million feet in Manhattan. I think they have here 20 million feet plus or minus. So we have huge companies right here. So transactions are big. Whatever space you want to be in, if it's office like what I do, or multifamily being the 7th biggest economy, there's so many opportunities for people interested in real estate. And that's one of the reasons why I came back to this part of the world after being in some other pretty cool places as well.
Well said. So I want to give a big round of applause for our panel. say that we won't get over right on time at 6:30. I just want to thank everyone that participated, thank our students, thank all the people that organized it. It's been fantastic. My first Real Estate Symposium, and it's not quite over. There's a networking time out back. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you outside.